Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as FDR's, but hey, it's something. Now, before we get into the news and stuff, I have two announcements. For one, we got a new patron. Finally, after all these years, another new patron enters the scene. Shane McCarthy. Hooray! Finally, more money's coming in. And let me explain. Well, I guess I'll just say this. It's not really necessarily an explanation. But remember that brief health saga? That kept coming into the Patreon? Not Patreon, but kept coming into the podcast as a recurring segment? Apparently it's back. Because I was thinking I didn't feel right. So then I went back to the doctor. They did some blood work. And as it turns out, my bilirubin levels are 2.2. Bilirubin is an enzyme that is created by your liver. You're not supposed to have that much in your bloodstream. For reference, the chart that I was given after the thing says that the normal amount that you're supposed to have is 0.3 to 1.2. And I remember when I went into the doctor and I was explaining that I didn't feel right, and he was just like, well, I think it's all in your head. Now I already had I already had higher bilirubin than normal. I had 1.6. But then actually I checked it again, that was more recently, and it was 1.5, which was basically they determined that it was probably due to the fact that I had a fatty liver, which was confirmed via an ultrasound. But again, this was a while ago. This was in July, June. And despite the fact that the number is significantly a bit bigger than it was last time, even though the last time I got blood work wasn't that long ago. July 20th was when I had a blood work that showed 1.5, and August 2nd was the one where I got blood work that said 2.2. I was referred to a specialist, but that specialist doesn't have an appointment until October, and I only scheduled that appointment to be that day because there's a chance that I could get an earlier appointment if someone else cancels. So basically at this point we're just playing a waiting game, waiting to see if symptoms get worse or if an appointment comes earlier. The only reason that I'm not doing something now, at the immediate time period, is because of a lot of factors. If there was any appointment that was earlier, I would be doing that one instead. Monetary issues, because I don't necessarily know about the insurance and whatever. And since I do not have a vehicle of my own, I have to bother a lot of other people to drive me to places, and I just necessarily don't want to do that. Especially considering one of them is very, 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 very very mad that I keep going to doctors for legitimate medical reasons. And there's a reason that I keep saying all this medical stuff to people on my shows. Very simple. Very bleak, but very simple. I don't want you to be in the dark if all of a sudden I magically disappear. With that out of the way, let's get right into the news. First, the Myanmar junta has pardoned some of Aung San Suu Kyi offenses. And for those who don't remember the situation, Myanmar had went a military coup after long-standing military control, and one of the leading figures of the Anti-Militarist party, Aung San Suu Kyi, was arrested. She was sentenced to 33 years in jail, including 3 years of hard labor for multiple convictions, including electoral fraud and receiving bribes. Now, a factoid that makes you understand that this is not necessarily in good faith is the fact that she is 78 years old, basically meaning they want her to serve the rest of her life in prison for basically standing up and fighting to stop militarist control. And recently they decided to pardon some of her offenses, mostly as a way to try and make the Western world not think their nation is as bad. But basically, the situation is, at most, she is getting 9 years taken off her sentence, which, if you do the math, is 24 years in jail. 24 years is longer than I've been alive, so it's clearly not necessarily in good faith yet again. It's a sad development in Myanmar, and hopefully the situation improves and Myanmar will be able to be free once more. speaking of free, there is one person who is not going to be free. Remember the Tree of Life synagogue shooting? The very tragic event where the gunmen who killed 11 people at Pittsburgh's Tree of Life synagogue? Yeah, well, the verdict of the situation has finally been reached. It has been found out that he will receive the death penalty, which is a very conflicting situation for many reasons. For starters, a lot of people on the left both denounce this very bad anti-Semitic attack, but also a lot of people on the left are not necessarily fans of the death penalty. And one person that is perceived as a personification of these feelings is the current governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, who is both Jewish, but also a fierce critic of the death penalty, who believes that the death penalty should be abolished. And many people are wondering, like, what would he do in this circumstance? Like, because he did say, like, I think at one point he did say that if death penalties were brought to him, he would try to stop them. But it's like, in this particular circumstance, will he be a bit different? Currently, we don't know how the situation is going to play out. But if I had to take a wild guess, I would say death penalty is probably what's going to happen in this case. I am no fan of the death penalty, but I mean, if it has to happen to somebody, like, I think most people on the left are basically washing their hands clean of this affair and just letting the system play out whatever happens. Like, whatever happens next, like, if somebody steps in and the death penalty gets revoked in the circumstance, then left ain't really going to be like, oh no, how could you? But if the death penalty happens, they're also not going to be like, oh no, how could you? Now, to transition to a somewhat lighter topic, let's talk about an interesting thing that was just revealed by a Disney Channel star. This has to do with the current writer's strike that is going on. Because in this whole writer's strike and the SAG-AFTRA strike that coincides with it, many actors have been regaling some stories of things that have happened during their tenures working for certain people. I'm actually going to tell two stories with this, and both of them revolve around one company, Disney. Remember how there was like a news story that broke not long ago where actors basically revealed that part of their contract with Disney was that they had to get a 360 scan of their head, basically saying, in case you die, we can use your likeness for future projects. An extra on the Marvel Cinematic Universe show, WandaVision, just revealed that she and a lot of other extras also got that treatment. Extras are having it put in their contracts that they're going to get 360 scans of their head to be used for future projects. Yeah, and people are legitimately thinking that AI will not have any problems in the future. No. But this story is the one I found the most interesting, because after finding this out, like, I was just scrolling on like Instagram and I saw this. I was just like after I saw it, I was confused. But then as I started thinking about it and then looking into it, I realized, wait. So a star of a Disney show named Joey Bragg, who was a main character on the show Liv and Maddie, which I barely watched. I wasn't really that interested in that show when growing up. But basically, he revealed a very interesting tidbit of his role in that show. Most people knew that there was an unspoken rule about Disney Channel shows that had a 65 episode rule, which usually meant that the shows would end after 65 episodes were produced. Similar to another show rule, like most TV networks have a 52 episode rule, where most shows are made with 52 episodes and then they're canceled just because after that point you have an episode that you can air every week. But that rule is unspoken, and a lot of other rules remain unspoken with Disney Channel products. And Joey Bragg revealed one rule that most people know, but they don't know. Okay, so the rule goes like this. He says that according to the contracts that he knew in the show, that you wouldn't actually get paid your full salary for a while. For a while, if you were working on a show, you would not get paid your full salary. You would only get paid 88% of the salary. And that was because Disney would then be able to keep certain costs in case the show didn't work out. If the show flopped, they still made a profit. And this would be how it works for the first 3 seasons of your show. Then, after that 3rd season, if your show becomes a hit, they will then continue the show. You get 4, 5, 6 seasons, and then you get 100% of your revenue. You get paid the actual rate that you are supposed to get paid. But he explained that Disney had a secret route to get around that rule, where after the 3rd season of your show would all of a sudden get a subtitle, which would then classify it as a completely different show after the 3rd season, thus guaranteeing that they don't have to pay you that full 100%, because technically this is season 1 of a new show. Him explaining that for his show it was Liv and Maddie for the first 3 seasons, then the 4th and final season was called Liv and Maddie Cali style, technically making it a different show. And then after seeing that, I immediately went, wait. And then it started forming, like the wheels started turning, and I'm like, wait. And then I started checking, and I was like, yeah, sure enough, a lot of Disney Channel shows get canceled after the 3rd season, and usually if they do get more seasons, they do get that stupid rebrand. Granted, not every show does it, but it happens a lot more often than you think. There might be shows that you might remember that you're like, wait, yeah, like Lab Rats. 4th season, it was called Lab Rats Bionic Island. Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, after its 3rd season, we got Sweet Life on Deck. This even seeps into their animated shows, not all of them, but a lot of their animated shows, well, mostly their Marvel animated shows, got the same treatment. The Ultimate Spider-Man show, first 2 seasons, Ultimate Spider-Man. Season 3, it was Ultimate Spider-Man Web Warriors, so it was technically a different show. Then season 4 was Spider-Man vs. the Sinister Six. Avengers Assemble, seasons 1 and 2, just Avengers Assemble. Then season 3, Ultron Revolution. Then Secret Wars. Then Black Panther's Quest. And this is why you should support the writer's strike, because this is what they do. Every single time they do this, like, they do this all the time, and we don't notice it. We notice it, but we don't notice it. We think, oh, it's just a marketing ploy. But it's like, no, they're literally trying to screw over their writers and actors, and we just don't notice it. Anyways, let's move on to the next story. This story is talking about the Rhode Island District 1 race, which is getting pretty heated because currently the progressive candidate in the race, Aaron Rugenberg, is starting to pick up momentum and is starting to become the favorite to win. But there have been some people who have not necessarily been too kind about the race, because some people are arguing that Aaron Rugenberg is not the best suited candidate to run in the race. Mostly people who think that he is sort of he's being seen as sort of like a white knight for progressives. Many people thinking a lot of political movements seem to have this problem. Even especially ones on the left, because the ones on the left are going to be more scrutinizing of this tactic, where people see like a white savior. We don't want a white savior. We want like a more progressive person of color. And unfortunately, Aaron Rugenberg is not a person of color, so he's been getting a lot of scrutiny from people who are like, we should give this race and help support a progressive woman of color. But unfortunately, there is no progressive woman of color in the race, so there's really not much else we can do except support Aaron Rugenberg. Though a progressive state legislator by the name of Samuel Bell recently rebuked Aaron Rugenberg and decided to back Sandra Cano, who backed Joe Biden in the presidential race, so it's clearly she's not a progressive, but he seems to think that they shouldn't simply anoint Aaron Rugenberg, and he even retweeted a person who said it's very interesting that Samuel Bell doesn't believe that we should anoint Aaron Rugenberg. But the reason why this segment is here is mostly due to the fact that a lot of people are starting to scrutinize outside groups starting to pour money into this race. And believe it or not, they're not just from people that I don't like. But first we will start talking about ones that I don't like, where the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Bold PAC has signaled plans to spend big money backing Lieutenant Governor Sabina Matos, who is the leading rival to Rugenberg in the race. And they're doing things that technically don't break the rules, where they basically tweeted, where one of the like bold PACS leaders were tweeting bit by bit exactly what they plan to do in the race, just so they could signal to the Matos campaign what they plan to do. And Rugenberg has started to attack them by saying Super PAC money has started pouring into our race. In fact, one Super PAC just booked over $300,000 in TV advertising for one of our opponents, and that's a lot of outside spending. And here's the issue with Super PACs: they are, generally speaking, way more aggressive in their mudslinging. But this problem arises when Aaron Rugenberg is currently getting some contributions from a Super PAC called Progress Rhode Island, which has two donors: a person by the name of Jim Selinsky, who has contributed $125,000, and Erica, who has gave $5,000 to the PAC. The interesting thing is, Erica is Aaron's mom, and Jim Selinsky is Aaron's father-in-law. So not only is Rugenberg benefiting from a Super PAC, but it's a Super PAC that his family owns. And when Rugenberg was asked if this was hypocritical for him receiving Super PAC money while he is also trying to say bad things about Sabina Matos getting Super PAC money, a campaign spokesperson told them there are a lot of outside vehicles that are spending heavily in this race for different candidates. In Congress, Aaron is committed to fighting to ban outside spending. Our campaign was not expecting this effort, and there is no coordination taking place. We are grateful for support from a wide range of Rhode Island groups and elected officials. Although they are not the only candidates that are getting outside spending, another PAC by the name of Democrat Serve PAC has so far reported $37,000 to Gabe Amo and plans to spend a $100,000 more. So I mean, from the looks of it, even in the amount of money being given to the PACs, Aaron seems to be the one that's getting the least amount. I mean, you could still make arguments on whether or not this is a good or bad thing, and the debates on how much influence Super PACs have on a lot of elected officials, and whether or not he would be different. That is basically yet to be determined. Speaking of things that have yet to be determined, this one has not been yet to be determined because it is something that is a problem now. The apparent Green Party torchbearer, Cornel West, is getting into a little bit of scrutiny, which is to be expected considering he is a prime and very noticeable third-party candidate. But Daily Beast published on Thursday that West owes $543,778.78 in unpaid taxes, which many people perceive as extremely hypocritical, considering Cornel West's big thing is that he wants to raise taxes on the rich. Now, I've seen a lot of people say a lot of things like, who cares if Cornel West doesn't pay his taxes when other politicians and whoever don't pay their taxes? Then you get some people who say that this is a big hypocritical thing, some saying it's pretty expected, some saying this is a big Democratic Party smear. I'm in the viewpoint of this isn't surprising. Cornel West, even though he talks a lot of talk about fighting for the common man, yeah, he is at the end of the day a rich man, a rich bougie guy. You could say he's a class traitor or whatever, but he is at the end of the day still part of the rich. I don't know if he's part of the 1%. He's not part of the 1%. He'd probably be in the upper, I don't know. I don't really know the specific amount because I don't know how much he makes and whatever. Either way, I wasn't backing him anyway, so it doesn't really matter to me. I'm just reporting it because I think it's an interesting thing to report, and showing how there is literally no candidate in the race that is good. If anybody is supporting any candidate in the 2024 election enthusiastically, they're either lying to you or they're grifting you. Because literally every single candidate in the upcoming election is garbage. But they're all different types of garbage, and it's up to you to figure out which garbage is the least problematic. Do you choose the ice cream that is currently infested with fire ants? Do you choose the medical waste bag that has needles pointing out of it that you can't grab at any point without sticking yourself? Do you choose the paper bag full of rusted needles that were used for a completely different circumstance? Do you choose that little can that has a warning symbol on it and is glowing green? Do you choose the used diaper? Do you choose the rotting meat? None of those choices are ideal, but you gotta pick one. To give somewhat whiplash to a political system that isn't as bad, let's move on to the main topic of this video. We're going to be talking about the upcoming New Zealand general election. The New Zealand election is scheduled to be October 14th, a decently long ways away, but I'm just getting this subject out of the way just so we can talk about this subject because I really can't figure out where to put it in any other circumstance. So, prelude and importance. New Zealand politics is basically a copy and paste of Australian politics, which is in and of itself a copy-paste of United Kingdom politics. Parliament that is technically under the British Crown, but mostly doing their own thing. It's a lot like the classic internet meme, can I copy your homework? Sure, but make sure you change something about it. But they all still broadly hit similar points. Parties of the center-left and center-right, with smaller parties that don't fit neatly into that dichotomy. The only major difference that I can think of with all of these nations is simply due to the fact that New Zealand is the one nation of the three that has the closest relationship with their indigenous population. Mostly because of the Treaty of Waitangi, which is a treaty, not necessarily a real treaty in the accordance of international law, but it was a treaty by the British governor of New Zealand and the leaders of the Maori indigenous population, because the French were trying to encroach on Maori people. So they went to the British that were trying to colonize New Zealand and basically said, hey, can we have some protections and stuff? So they inevitably reached an agreement where the Maori citizens were considered British citizens as well. They sort of, on paper, gave up their land, but in the sense of like, your land is here, but it is technically our land now, but you can still live on it. Unlike most other treaties in Western democracies, where it's like, they basically give up the land, and then they can just kick the natives off of it. Now, I'm not going to say that there hasn't been any conflict with the Maori and New Zealand or the British or the French or whatever, because I don't necessarily know about that situation. I'm not as adept in this particular nation's history as I am with a lot of other nations' history, but this document is treated as like one of the pinnacle documents of the nation. And due to this, it has led to Maori citizens being so integral to the world of New Zealand. But there are still some tensions with some, like, Anglo-white people, which we'll get into in a bit. But due to the fact that this is a Western nation that doesn't have a lot of history with coups and all that other stuff, all we have to do is talk about the last administration of this nation. And the last administration was under the Labour Party leader, Jacinda Ardern. Now, Jacinda is very similar to Shauna Marin in a lot of regards. Took over the party after the last guy left, young, female, social democratic. The difference is that Ardern had actually managed to win a term in her own right, which probably led to a lot more respect given to Ardern than Shauna. But as we'll get into, a lot of can be a very misleading term. Jacinda was very ambitious for her term, pledging to end child poverty in 10 years, and she created a social welfare program called the Families Package, which would give a $60 a week payment to families, expanding free doctor's visits, rolling out a pilot program for free school lunches, declared a climate emergency in New Zealand, and trying to make the country carbon neutral. But of course, her biggest test during her administration was the COVID-19 pandemic. And coincidentally, New Zealand was regarded as one of the nations who handled COVID the best, because she didn't waste time in regards to optics or whatever, because a lot of other governments basically treated like, oh, we're gonna look bad if we do certain things. Jacinda was like, nope, we're just gonna get this situation solved before it gets bad. And of course, there were some people who loved her for it, and some who hated her for it. And she got a ton of scrutiny, especially from anti-vaxxers, and polls said that she might not do so good when the election rolled around. But then, in a massive bit of news, On January 19th, 2023, Jacinda announced that she was not only retiring in the upcoming election, but that she would be resigning from her position as Prime Minister in order to spend more time with her family, citing that she did not have much energy left for the job, not so subtly hinting at the fact that the far-right's consistent and mostly misogynistic harassment towards her was the reason why she quit. And as such, that means regardless of who wins, we will see a new Prime Minister. The main issues of the campaign are really two things. One, continuing Jacinda Ardern's welfare COVID plans, and one smaller one that isn't really that big, but it is making its way in this issue, is the relation between the Maori people and the current government. And we'll get into that when we get into the parties and candidates themselves. Now, New Zealand has 15 political parties that are registered in the upcoming elections. We have 2 Christian fundamentalist parties, a cannabis legalization party, a couple of environmentalist parties, one of which being an extremely conspiratorial environmentalist party, and in the last year, we've had 3 anti-vaccine mandate parties. But for the sake of this video, there's really only 5 parties that have a chance of making it into the Parliament House. The only party that might also have a chance is New Zealand First, which is a generic nationalistic populist movement that's right-wing on some issues, left-wing on other issues. Well, actually, they're not really left-wing on certain issues. They're mostly centrist conservative. And due to the fact that we don't have that many parties to talk about, we're going to go, instead of biggest to smallest or smallest to biggest, we're going to go from furthest right to furthest left. So the first one, we have ACT New Zealand, a libertarian/classical liberal party formed to promote the radical free market politics within New Zealand. While they claim to reject right-wing populism, when you build your brand on being a right-wing alternative to the center-right, who do you think is going to join your party? It's the same thing with libertarians. For the Gary Johnson era, they kept trying to deny right-wing populists entering their party, yet who is currently leading their party? Their current platform calls for a flat tax, restoring New Zealand's 3 strikes law. If you haven't heard of a 3 strikes law, it basically says that if you are tried 3 times for a serious crime, you get life sentence without a trial. Repealing environmental legislation, legalizing euthanasia, and abolishing the Maori electorates and holding a referendum on the current co-governance agreement with New Zealand. They are led by David Seymour. Interestingly, he is half Maori, but there's actually a funny incident that happened in 2022 where Jacinda Ardern called David Seymour an arrogant prick on the parliament floor, which is just funny. Anyways, the next party is the National Party, a liberal conservative party formed by a liberal and a conservative party to oppose the socialism of the Labour Party. Why are these guys further left than ACT? Honestly, I have no clue. There really isn't that much difference in their social or economic policy. Speaking of, their platform calls for opposing abortion, opposing euthanasia, opposing legalizing weed, and opposing the Maori co-governance and affirmative action. They are currently led by Christopher Luxon. He apparently made a weird joke about New Zealand's fertility rates. Basically, he was giving a speech, and then at one point, he mentioned their low fertility rates and basically just said, hey guys, we need to make this get more, if you catch my drift. Wink, wink. Anyways, the next party, the Labour Party, the party that has currently led New Zealand into such a good spot nowadays, they have the most to lose. The formerly socialist, now social democratic Party of New Zealand. Their party had the easiest platform because they have a party constitution that outlines their outlook politically very well. All political authority comes from the people by democratic means, including universal suffrage, regular and free elections with a secret ballot. The natural resources of New Zealand belong to all peoples, and these resources, and in particular the non-renewable resources, should be managed for the benefit of all, including future generations. All people should have equal access to all social, economic, cultural, political, and legal spheres, regardless of wealth or social position, and continuing participation in the democratic process. Cooperation, rather than competition, should be the main governing factor in economic relations, in order that a greater amount and a just distribution of wealth can be assured. All people are entitled to dignity, self-respect, and the opportunity to work. All people, either individually or in groups, may own wealth or property for their own use, but in any conflict of interest, people are always more important than property, and the state must ensure a just distribution of wealth. Te Tiriti o Watanagi is the founding document of New Zealand, and that the treaty should be honored in the party, government, society, and the wahānau. Peace and social justice should be promoted throughout the world by international cooperation and mutual respect. The same basic human rights protected by the state apply to all people regardless of race, sex, marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity, age, religious faith, political belief, or disability. Honestly, pretty base document, all things considered. They are currently led by Chris Hipkins, who apparently has a nickname known as Chippy because he apparently has a schoolboy demeanor. He is apparently considered more right-wing than Jacinda Ardern, but he is still broadly a social democrat. It's not like we're going from Corbyn to Blair. Like, it's not like that. It's not like Corbyn to Starmer. It's like, basically we're going from, I don't know necessarily the correct comparison that I could give it to. I mean, even though this doesn't necessarily count as like Bernie to AOC, where it's like, no, actually it would be, I can't really figure out, I can't really figure out the best comparison to use. The next party is the Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand. For those who don't know, Aotearoa is the name that the Maori people give the nation of New Zealand. Originally, it was just given to the Northern Island, but now broadly Maori people believe that that should just be the name of the nation itself. It is a green political party that is the favorite choice for lefties who are leftier than thou, but really don't stray that far away from the positions of the Labour Party. They are technically to the left of the Labour Party, as I said. Their platform is mostly focused on environmentalism, pushing heavy for environmental protection, a pollution tax. They also are very against foreign military interventions and are for a universal basic income. They are currently led by co-leaders Marama Davidson and James Shaw. They really don't have that much interesting information regarding them. But the last party is probably the most fascinating party of them all. This is the only party that I can think of that has sort of changed where it is ideologically ever since its foundation. Granted, like I said, we have had some changes in regards to the Labour Party. Originally it was socialist, now it's social democratic, but it is still broadly considered like the center-left party of New Zealand. Meanwhile, this party was originally somewhat close to the center, but now it has shifted to basically be the furthest left party that New Zealand has. The party in question is Te Pāti Maori, or the Maori Party, a party that represents the interests of the indigenous Maori population, advocating for Tino Rangati Ratanga, literally defined as highest chieftainship, but is basically interpreted to mean Maori self-determination. Their platform, as it is very heavily focused on the indigenous population of New Zealand, takes aspects of the Maori culture and then translate it. First, we have wahānau, which means family/tribe, which advocates for helping Maori people across Aotearoa. Then we have Rangatiratanga, which is sovereignty, advocating for the protection of the land of the Maori people. Then we have Kawanatanga, which means government, which means growing the economic resources for the Maori people. And lastly, we have Te Tiriti o Waitangi, which is holding the British accountable to the treaty between the Maori and the British. This party also has co-leaders. First, we have Debbie Ngarewa-Packer and Raiwiri Waititi. The latter you may be familiar with for various reasons. See, for starters, there's this debacle on the Wikipedia page regarding him because they say that he is related to the filmmaker Taika Waititi, but I haven't really found any information claiming that they do share a familiar relation. But the more political reason why you might know him is because he has become very prevalent for his outspoken nature in regards to his political views. For starters, he's been making a lot of videos denouncing the British monarchy, even after the Queen of England died. There was another incident where a member of the Labour Party decided that they were going to leave to join Te Pāti Maori, and him and the co-leader decided to do like a traditional Maori dance in order to celebrate this occasion, and they were kicked out of the chamber. But the most famous incident that happened with him on the parliamentary floor was when he refused to wear ties, calling them a colonial noose, giving a speech on the parliament where he took off his tie, then put on a traditional Maori neck accessory, the hei tiki. However, the rules of parliament stated that if you were not dressed appropriately, you would not be called. So what ended up happening was, whenever Waititi wanted to talk in the legislature, the Labour speaker, Trevor Mallard, just flat out refused to call on him and made a very open point to not call on Waititi, literally saying like, you can't dress like that. You are dressed wrong. Therefore, I'm not going to call on you. And then even though Waititi kept trying to get his agenda put through, people were like, he was still saying like, no, you are not getting called on. And then he just got flat out thrown out of the chamber because he wouldn't follow the rules. And then afterwards, people were like, wait, this rule's stupid. And then they just stopped following the rule. Like, the rule got repealed. I'm 100% on board with Waititi. He was in the right. He was, like, screwed over heavily by the Labour lead, like, the Labour speaker in that regard. It's just like, why? Like, I believe that most, if not all, government workers should not have to wear, like, suits and ties to begin with at all. Like, I think it should be optional if you want, but, I mean, I don't think it should be required anymore, especially in the case of if you're in an indigenous population and you have traditional garb that you need to wear. And in most other nations, you don't have to make this big of a deal to change the rules. Like in America, when Ilhan Omar was going to enter into the Congress, they immediately changed the rule to allow her to wear her hijab in the Congress chambers. Although granted, we are also a nation that got really mad that a Muslim member of the US House wanted to swear in on the book of his faith, even though there wasn't even a rule that said that he had to swear in on a book that wasn't of his faith. Now, polling is where things get a bit more interesting. Well, actually, they're not really that interesting to begin with, but let's explain. So, originally, it was like after Jacinda Ardern's results, everything was going great. Everybody loved her. Everybody was doing great. Everybody was like cool, wonderful. COVID was seemingly defeated, so they slowly started easing out of some restrictions, and things started getting better for them. Labour looked like they were going in for a massive W, but then Omicron happened, which meant that they had to re-up some COVID restrictions, and that's when the National Party started getting some momentum. Now they were getting, like, neck-and-neck polls. Like, it started going from, like, let's go over the polls initially. Like, originally it was like there was no ifs, ands, or buts. Labour was winning. But then after Omicron came around, it was like 40 to 32 Labour, 35 to 33 National, or Conservative. Like I said, the whole copy-paste thing, it's like I got confused for a second. And the National Party just kept getting some momentum, to the point where Labour wins started disappearing, and the most recent polls that have been conducted show a decent national win, with the most recent poll conducted in July of 2023. Well, actually, we'll do both the ones from July. Like, first, there's just one that just says July, and it has 33.5 for National, 26 for Labour, 14 for ACT, 9 for Green, 6 for Te Te Pāti Maori, 5 for New Zealand First, and there's 4% for something called the Opportunities Party, which is another like environmentalist party. Then the one from July 26th to the 31st, we have 36 for the National, 32 for Labour, 12.1 for ACT, 9.6 for Greens, Te Pāti Maori with 2.7. New Zealand First actually got 4%, 4.1. Then the Opportunities Party, 1.5. And then lastly, we have, I thought it was one of the new like anti-vax parties, but it was it's called the New Conservative Party, which is a far-right party, getting dead last with a whopping 0.7% of the votes. One thing that is interesting is that I did see a poll that, like, when you do polls on the party leaders, that's where things get a little bit different, because when they say, who would you prefer as Prime Minister, Hipkins almost always wins. Like, ever since Jacinda Ardern left, Hipkins has basically taken that. Like, one that I did see was when it was like Chris Hipkins versus Christopher Luxon. Who do you trust more? Hipkins had more trust than distrust, and Luxon had way more distrust than trust. This one is interesting because it also has seat projections, but unfortunately, seat projections don't necessarily do so good for them. They've only done 6 seat projections, and they have not necessarily been doing so hot for Labour. So the first seat projection was all the way back in May of 2023, which had 45 Labour, 34 National, 12 Green, 16 ACT, Te Pāti Maori 6, and New Zealand First 7, with the projection that there would be a national, massive, dream coalition of Labour, Green, and Maori. Then in June, we have 47 National, 41 Labour, 10 Green, 16 ACT, and 6 Te Pāti Maori, with National and ACT forming a coalition together with 63 seats. Then we have 43 National, 41 Labour, 12 Green, 17 ACT, 7 Te Pāti Maori with a hung parliament, and similar results in an early July poll: 45 National, 43 Labour, 13 Green, 15 ACT for Te Pāti Maori. But then, in mid-July to the end of July, we have 47 National, 42 Labour, 12 Green, 16 ACT, 3 Te Pāti Maori, with ACT and National forming a coalition with 63 seats. But the most recent one that was conducted had 43 National, 33 Labour, 12 Green, 18 ACT, 8 Te Pāti Maori, and New Zealand First was 6, again with National and ACT forming a coalition, this time with only 61 seats. Now, actually, this is a nation that I actually think has 3 pretty decent options on the ballot. Labour, Green, and Maori do actually all strike a chord with me, and ideally, I would want a massive government of all 3 of these parties. Is that likely to happen? I don't know, but I would absolutely love for that to happen. But if you're a Kiwi in my audience, then I would have to say you have to look into your individual constituency, but I would advise it like this. I would say for the most part vote Labour unless you're in a Maori heavy district. Like if you're in one of the Maori districts, especially if you're in the Waititi district, 100% vote for Waititi. But ideally, I would want all 3 of these parties to work together. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say on that. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when a future video of mine comes out. And for interested more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon.